everybody, it is bedtime story hour. We're going to continue in our Jesus Storybook Bible, and today it is God to the rescue. And we're going to talk about Moses in the burning bush. Question for you before we start. What is the hottest thing you've ever touched? Izzy, how about you? What's the hottest thing you've ever touched?
My
Anything hot?
My seatbelt.
Oh, in the summertime?
Yeah, when it's burning.
Ouch! Ouch! That'll be really hot.
I burn myself.
Oh, on fire? On the stove?
I was reaching out to, I thought it was all cooled off.
Right.
I was reaching out to hold it with my bare hands.
Okay.
Like we are having nachos. I was reaching out to
Oh,
hold
yeah,
it.
you gotta be real careful.
And
Yep. So when it comes to fire, we gotta be very careful. And God reveals, whenever God shows up in the Bible, there's lots of fire. Fire's powerful, it's strong, it's dangerous, just like God.
all the time.
That's true, not all the time. All right, here we go. Joseph and his brothers grew old and died. How is that for the beginning of a story? But their children's children's children stayed on in Egypt, where they became a very, very, very large family. Later on, a new king began to rule, but this Pharaoh didn't remember Joseph and how he interpreted the dreams. And this Pharaoh didn't like God's people at all. He made them into his slaves. He would beat them and make them work harder and harder and harder. And God's people cried out in prayer that God would rescue them. And God heard them. He remembered his promise to Abraham all those years ago. And he would look after his people. He would find a way to set them free. Now one day Moses was looking after some sheep when something caught his eye. It was a bush that was behaving very oddly. It was flickering with flames, but its leaves weren't burning up. He took a closer look. Moses, boomed a big voice. Moses leapt back. The bush was talking to him. I have heard my people's cry, God said. I have seen their tears, so I have come down to rescue them. Go to Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go free. Moses was afraid, but God said, I will be with you. So Moses went to the Pharaoh. Pharaoh, Moses began. God said, God never heard of him, Pharaoh said. But Moses kept going. God says, let his people go. Why should I? Pharaoh said. I don't want to, and I won't. So he didn't. So God gave Pharaoh 10 warnings called plagues. And if you kiddos can see, here's some pictures. There's flies, bzz, 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 frogs, ribbit, and there's like gnats, little bugs. All right. So God gave Pharaoh 10 warnings called plagues. First, God turned the river into blood, and no one could drink the water. But still, Pharaoh would not let them go. So God made frogs come hopping and leaping and jumping. In your bed frogs, in your hair frogs, in your soup frogs, all over everywhere frogs. Make them go away, Pharaoh screamed. Then your people can go. So God took away all the frogs, but Pharaoh changed his mind. You can't go, he said. So then God sent zillions and zillions of gnats. But still Pharaoh said, no. So then God sent swarms of flies, buzzing in your eyes flies. And after that, sickness, and then horrible boils, and huge hailstones, and a storm of locusts, then darkness when it should have been day, until it seemed like the whole world, creation and everything was coming undone, falling back into darkness and emptiness and nothingness. But each time Pharaoh said, make it stop, and then I'll let everyone go free. And each time when God stopped the plague, Pharaoh changed his mind and said, actually, no, you can't go. Finally, Moses warned Pharaoh, obey God, or he will have to send the worst thing of all. And Pharaoh just laughed. Ha 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 ha, he said. So God said, the oldest boy in each family of Egypt must die, but my people will be safe. God told his people to take their best lamb, to kill it, and to put some of the blood on the front door. And when God passes over your house, Moses explained, God will see the blood and know that the lamb died instead of you. So that night, it was just as God had said. Suddenly, piercing through the darkness, echoing down the corridors of the palace, came a blood-curdling scream. Pharaoh's oldest son had died. At last, Pharaoh did what God said. Get out, Pharaoh shouted. Just go. And so, you kiddos see the picture? There are the Israelites, God's special people. They were slaves in Egypt, and now they are finally free.
Some of them were born in Egypt and never seen the outside.
That's right, all of them at this point. And so that very night, Moses and God's people fled out of Egypt and out of slavery, and they were free at last. God's people would always remember this great rescue, and they call it Passover. But even a greater rescue was going to come. You see, many, many years later, God was going to do it again. He was going to come down once more to rescue his people, but this time, God was going to set them free forever and ever. And that's the end of our story tonight. The next story is called God Makes a Way. We hope you guys have a good bedtime. Bye-bye.